Josh, good morning.
Good morning, Ryan. I'm super excited to get this kicked off, man. I know this has been a long time coming, and I'm really excited to get the opportunity to talk about this with you as we keep going through this.
I know you really mentioned how you're talking to a ton of the most innovative recruiters out there, and they're saying the most wild use cases of how they're implementing AI, not just in the fluffy form, but in the really practical form. And you thought it would be helpful to share it with the world. So excited to use this time going forward with this new show to do that for people.
Everyone thinks of AI and they instantly go to the Terminator because that's the biggest, baddest thing that we all think about. And honestly, a staple movie, at least in my life growing up. I mean, Arnold, but that's for another conversation there. How can we actually just start to bring more awareness around what this can do and how specifically we can start to use it to improve our day-to-day functions? Because as the world continues to innovate, I know the goal of what AI is looking to do is not to replace jobs. That's not the goal of what it is. But it is going to make us more efficient because there's all these little tasks that we're doing that we know are just so mundane and annoying to do. Why not, instead of outsourcing that somewhere else, we can just bring a tool in to help automate that process so we get real-time feedback, updating processes that we're looking to do. And I know the big goal of what we're looking to accomplish here is to help bring some education around what it can actually be doing in a practical standpoint.
Yeah, like I know I talk to CEOs of other recruiting technology companies every single week. And like needless to say, I don't think many actual recruiters hear about what is on the forefront and what's actually in the works. So we're hoping to shed some light on that in these episodes every single week. The thing that I'm most excited about is to share what some of our most cutting edge customers are thinking about, how they're incorporating AI, not just into their recruiting process, but also to power their social process.
I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw this really cool post come up from Harvard Business Review talking about how AI is just used from like a general day-to-day perspective. And what it mentioned is that they surveyed something like 19,000 employees at companies. And right now, only 1 in 10 employees are actually using AI on a weekly basis. But they find that 40% of the people using it are using it to do all these like little task management is how they refer to it. I feel like the end goal of what I'm really looking to accomplish from this is to drastically increase that number, because I think there's a lot more than just little admin work tasks that we can help take off people's plate. And I think it's gonna be really cool to showcase some of those on episodes like this.
Yeah, and maybe we'll even get the magician Jordan Malfara, CTO of Quill, on one of these days. I think most people I hear from our customer perspective are using like OpenAI. Like I know there's all this buzz around GPT 4.0, but Jordan's a big believer in Gemini too right now. So I think it will be interesting to have someone with a really hardcore technical perspective come on to talk about some of the pros and cons of the different models.
I know as I was getting into this AI game, that was a big learning curve for me, is understanding how those differences actually apply using a free version online versus what some of these enterprise platforms are actually looking to do too.
What's something that you really want to learn about from AI recruiting that keeps you up at night, or doesn't have to keep you up at night? But
I think the biggest thing that I'm really interested in are just getting more use cases of how people are using it. Because the biggest things that I hear a lot of teams using AI for, a lot of especially businesses thinking about using AI, is especially through the sourcing process. So you hear a lot about candidate matching or similar candidate profiles, so really helping on the top of funnel. Maybe that's creating job descriptions or creating a lot of like that really superficial work as it comes to AI. And I do know that there's a lot of hesitancy around using AI for more customer conversations or in front of customers on that side of things too. And I think one of the really big topics that I'm a big fan of that we should be speaking to a lot in this is that 10-80-10 principle. Nobody wants some AI tool to be creating their final copy to send out to a customer. And I 100% agree. That should not be the intention of how it's being used, right? Because I mean, we even look back to middle school or school in general, we hear about people trying to turn in final essays that just have ChatGPT written. It's so easy to pick out, right? And that's not the intention of how this stuff should be used. And so I'm really thinking that one of the really cool topics that we can dive into is how should we be thinking about applicably using AI in a customer facing perspective when we're doing things like sending documents over after calls. Maybe that's actually writing emails from more of a sourcing perspective as well. But really leaning into that 10-80-10 principle, which is using a template that we have in our mind on how that should be structured. That's that 10%. What does that template look like for a structured email? Using AI to help personalize or create the copy that we want to add in there. But the biggest, most important step is that last 10%, which is where we go back into things, add our finishing touches on it to make sure that it's actually relevant to that person that we're sending it out to, and sending it from there. Right? Again, if the goal of AI is to make us 30% more efficient, 30% is not 100%. And so we also need to understand what should that flow look like and how can that actually improve our productivity as recruiters in general to make sure we're actually able to send messages out at scale that doesn't just get flagged by AI fluff. Because we know systems like Google and Microsoft are going to start spam blocking those as it continues to develop. And so we also need to make sure that we're arming and educating our users and buyers, or just recruiters in general, on how they can actually be using this properly to make sure that they don't get that bad rep or bad name, that they're just somebody who just blasts out general AI components. That's they're trying to talk to people.
Even words like, are you open to learning more? That word open, they think you're saying like open a link. So that dings you right away when you're sending like a business development email. But I see them pretty quickly mapping that to also detecting AI emails and maybe even creating like a warning around like, hey, warning, this seems like it was made by AI. Because it's going to keep getting more and more widely used. And let's be honest, a lot of people are lazy. So become the editor. Don't be the doer anymore. You don't need to do everything. That's what AI is for, but definitely still be the editor. You made a good point around like the different use cases. I thought I'd just bring you up to speed around what I've been hearing for the last week. In corporate recruiting, internal recruiters, there's less of a need for something like candidate matching unless you're at like a really big organization. But for the mid-market and SMB, candidate matching doesn't seem to be something that they feel is going to move the needle. There's nothing that's really executed it well yet, from what I've heard. Like everything's been kind of left to be desired. I think it's mostly due to data quality, but that is a whole nother topic that we can get into eventually. The other thing that I've heard a lot of people kind of ask us about is like AI actually doing interviews, like actually interviewing someone. And there is a lot of mixed emotions on that. Like we talk to executive search firms, we talk to staffing firms that are sourcing more like hourly work and like higher turnover work and things like that. But then from an executive search perspective, I don't know about you, like you're a head of sales, I'm a CEO, I'm not having an AI talk to me on an interview. Like we're evaluating the opportunity just as much as the company's evaluating us. Know what business you're in, know what clientele you're in. Going to a Porsche dealership versus like a Toyota or Hyundai dealership. And I drive a Hyundai, so like I'm not talking bad about Hyundais or Toyotas here. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been hearing. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I 100% agree. And I think especially when we're looking at just going back to the top of candidate matching, the hardest thing is always going to be based on the quality of the data. Because I mean, you and I both led and managed many sales teams, recruited 50 plus people on our own as well. And I know the biggest challenge that I've always had is that every single individual has different short forms or shortcuts for how they want to input information. It's going to make it more difficult because the way that you might be inputting information is slightly different than me, that's slightly different than Sarah. And so when we're going back to use some of those candidate matching profiles, it doesn't know how to match because you put a short form in, I had a long form, and Sarah put something else in. But even if we're looking back to the other topic that you were talking about there and using AI for aspects like actually interviewing candidates, from what I've been hearing is it really depends on the hiring profile that we're looking for, right? When we're thinking about executive search, those can be very big opportunities, right? The margins on those deals are larger. The risk profile, if they get that role wrong, is even bigger. And so I think in those kind of contexts, it does make sense to be driven by a human entity, mainly because there's higher stakes involved.
That's scary, Josh. We're starting to use the term human entity.
Human entity.
What is going on?
The biggest thing that we need to start thinking about, because this is what's on every single leader from a recruiter standpoint, is how do I increase the margins on the roles that I'm filling? If something like an AI model could be used to help conduct initial interviews, especially just those initial screening calls, like Ryan, tell me about yourself. What's your experience? What excites you about a role? What does your ideal role look like? Like those 15 to 30-minute initial screening calls. We're already using AI in a lot of those similar components when somebody sends in a resume and it's scraping through the resume to actually see if they're even relevant to that or not. But we all know how well that works. So many phenomenal candidates get left out because we can't understand context. And I actually think it can be used to bring more of a personal aspect into that first superficial level of the screening process before it might actually make sense to have a recruiter conduct an interview.
I'm a big Jot form guy. So I've hired almost 100 people now in my career so far, and like doing a Jot form or some type of application form, it really limits you. I was thinking like, how about a BDR? Have an AI do a mock cold call with someone. That would be really cool. And I don't think it's trying to be an interview. So it's making application forms much more intelligent, much more dynamic. The interview, let's be honest, like it's a two-way street. And if it's not, like you're doing it wrong.
It's not just what questions you're asking, but it's how you're asking the questions, what follow-up and layering questions we're asking to really get to the meat of a conversation. Yep. And to your point, if there's ever a day where AI can actually do that, yeah, then we're probably in trouble. But I don't see that being the case because I really don't see it ever getting to a point where it'll be able to replace an actual human, because there's so many intangibles that we know to be looking for that it's what makes that competitive difference around the best recruiters in the world to the average class is really like the quality of how they're able to dig in and get context from conversations. And that's something that I know is very widespread knowledge as well.
We'll see everybody next week. And thanks so much for tuning into the first one. Excited to bring on some really powerhouse guests and keep this conversation going.